how much you are affected by global trends, how much you are directly relating to the environment, to interest groups, to consumers. And those two giants, they are in a certain field where basically if they merge with another giant, it doesn't really change that much. Because they don't link up with some small company they don't know. They don't link up with anyone that would create a lot of disturbances. It's a very clean street, it's very clear, it's very straightforward. Because if Sinopec merges with another global big player, well, it won't change that much. So the effect on the performance and on the outside perspective is not really that high. Unless you have some catastrophe, unless you have an oil rig exploding, or unless you're destroying the nature of a whole country, there is no big influence. It just goes very smoothly. You just got to maintain it properly, you just got to maintain it quietly, and as long as that moves forward, it's clear. So, looking at resources and obtaining resources as an example of Chinese companies going abroad in the form of merger and acquisition, we have the situation that it's big companies being like big elephants, very stable. They have been active for many, many years in other countries based on their traditional business. They do very well know how to manage the environment in the way of managing the business, managing different stakeholders. They run a very low risk of, after joining up with other companies, that they would be too different, that this would create and generate a lot of problems, like communication problems or management problems. So their risk is rather low. So companies in the field of obtaining resources, or financial resources, or mainly here it's natural resources, their experiences in M&As basically have been quite good. Of course, there are the examples which I've not listed here, where Chinese companies also tried, active in the resource sector, like coal, also tried to link up and purchase overseas companies, purchase overseas groups to merge with them, because China does need those energy resources. Now, in other cases, it did not work. So there's not a performance on the shareholding, on the shares after the merger, because there was no merger. So the problem in this very specific part is, and the high risk in this very specific part is, that you are facing up against political problems and political interests you cannot overcome. When we look at the example of the coal industry, for example, or other sectors where Chinese companies tried to get into those sectors by M&A approaches, they had to figure out that they could not realize their business because there was high political defense and high political working against everything. So the big problem you have here is on a very high magnitude, because if you are in such a specific sector, you always run a very high political risk. Now, what is the transaction background here? Well, how do they move? Sinopec, as I said before, pursues a safety strategy. So Sinopec, what they want to do, they want to make sure that they don't run the risk of being dependent on just some regions in the world to make sure that they have access to sufficient resources. With Sinopec's background and Sinopec's mission, they have to make sure their prime goal is make sure at whatever cost it is somehow, that we have access, China has access to resources globally. So their approach is a very global approach, a very globally distributed approach, but a very safe approach. edX. edX, on the other side, with a different background, faces again the very big problem of many companies outside the league of Sinopec faces. And that problem is the cash flow. And we see that companies like edX, as soon as there is some change in the market, as soon as there is an impact on global development like a drop in oil prices, edX has big problems. Or companies like edX have huge problems because we have to look again at the background, how they are linked up with the government, what backing they have with the government, about the background of their financial strength, of whether or not they can have sufficient access to funding, or whether they have to take care of that by themselves. And here we have a difference, a huge difference between, on the one side, Sinopec, and on the other side, edX. Because Sinopec, well, they have a complete different background, and their mission is, you guys make sure, at any cost, that we do have access to sufficient resources. Access is in another league. And edX has another background. So when the markets reach an unstable environment and an unstable timing, such companies face the problem of cash flow, which affects very heavily their further development. Now, going into the next part of obtaining technology and management experience. The first example I've chosen here is the H&A Group. The H&A Group is a Chinese enterprise with the highest total assets. The H&A Group, we know its development, in 1994 has transformed from a single airline company into an integrated service company, an integrated product company, doing everything from aviation, logistics, and financial services by now. Of course, in China they also are active in other fields like property development. But basically what we look at is the traditional sector of aviation and of course logistics that comes with that, and a newer business sector being financial services. As a second example, looking at obtaining technology or management experience, is NH Group. NH Group is Europe's third largest hotel management group. So many in Europe don't even know. Many in Europe don't even know this name. They never heard of them. So NH Group, they've been established in 1976 and have gained a lot of experience over the last 30 years. They have gained a lot of know-how